Welcome to the Rain Room True Tales. Tonight, we journey to April 1912 and meet one of Titanic's most remarkable passengers, Margaret Molly Brown, a 44-year-old American socialite and philanthropist. Born in Hannibal, Missouri in 1867 to Irish immigrants, she rose from humble beginnings to Denver high society through her marriage to mining magnate J. Brown. On April 10, 1912, Molly boarded Titanic in Cherbourg, France, alone, having left her daughter in Paris to tend a sick grandchild. Clad in a tailored gray travel suit and wide-brimmed hat, she carried only a small carpet bag, her famous determination, and a fierce compassion for others. As you settle in, picture the early morning light on the quay at Cherbourg. The immense hull of Titanic at rest, funnels dark against the sky, her 4 smokestacks poised like sentinels. Imagine Molly stepping up the gangway, varnished rail, black-gloved hand, the murmur of crowds mixing with the soft thrum of engines warming below decks. She paused to inspect the brass White Star Line badge, then found her first-class stateroom, spacious, paneled in rich oak, with a porthole framing the calm channel waters. The ship's grandeur was everywhere. Turkish baths and a squash court, electric elevators and a grand staircase carved like ocean waves. Yet Molly's sharp mind noted more than luxury. She observed crew drills, asked questions of engineers, and chatted with wireless operators testing their Marconi sets. Keep Molly in your thoughts as we step off the gangway and into Titanic's world. A floating palace powered by human ingenuity, carrying dreams, and, unknown to all, a test of courage against the sea. After boarding, Molly spent her first afternoon studying Titanic's pedigree in the first-class smoking room, where large blueprints lined the walls. These drawings, drafted by Harland and Wolff's naval architects beginning in 1908, mapped a ship nearly 900 feet long and 175 feet tall. Picture the Belfast shipyard, huge gantry cranes, walls of steel plates, and the steady ring of rivets driven by hot hammers. Riveting teams worked in pairs, one holding the red-hot rivet, the other backing each head with a dolly until the 2 pieces formed a perfect seam. By late 1910, the hull was complete and towed to the outfitting berth for interiors. There, thousands of electricians strung miles of wiring for lamps and wireless sets. Carpenters inched mahogany paneling into first-class suites. Plasterers molded ceilings with intricate floral patterns. Engineers installed the massive triple-expansion engines, each shaft weighing over 30 tons, while stokers scraped soot from boiler furnaces below decks. Above it all, Titanic's 4 funnels soared, though only 3 vented smoke. The 4th was a dummy, installed for symmetry and extra ventilation. A plaque in the smoking room declared Titanic practically unsinkable, a phrase picked up by newspapers even before the maiden voyage. Molly noted every detail with fascination. The precision of bulkhead doors tested to stay watertight with 4 flooded compartments, the symmetry of steel ribs, and the optimism etched into every rivet. As she turned from the blueprints to view a scale model under glass, she likely felt both awe and the subtle tension of human ambition confronting the Atlantic's vastness. On January 31, 1911, Titanic slid into the River Bann amid cheers and steam. Lady Astrid Chalmers smashed a bottle of Irish whiskey across the bow, officially blessing the voyage. Around 100,000 spectators packed the quays, marveling at a hull nearly triple the size of its nearest rival. In Belfast's cold air, workers in heavy coats and goggles hoisted blocks into place. Steam hisses and hammer strikes filled the yard as Titanic's massive weight eased from the slipway. Families waved from gangplanks of nearby vessels. Children squealed at the sight of Titanic's enormous side plates. Over the next months, Titanic was outfitted with its lavish interiors. In that same Belfast yard, Molly later recalled watching giant cranes lift staircase sections into first-class saloons. She noted how plasterers painted swirling cornices by hand and how the Turkish baths below deck promised a novelty that rivaled any land-based spa. By October 1911, when Titanic was finally towed to Belfast Lough for sea trials, the city seemed to exhale, its greatest industrial achievement nearly ready. Molly, then touring Europe, would only hear these accounts later, but in Cherbourg she could already sense the pride Belfast workers felt, having given birth to the largest moving object ever built by humankind. From April 2nd to 3rd, 1912, Titanic underwent sea trials in Belfast Lough. Molly, traveling incognito on another ship nearby, watched signals exchanged between tugboats and the bridge overhead. Engineers tested top speed, over 22 knots, and fair weather handling, executing tight turns to prove maneuverability. On deck, officers timed compass accuracy and tested lifeboat davits. Wireless operators tapped out test messages to Marconi stations, checks that would later prove vital when disaster struck. Titanic's gyroscopes and telegraphs synced perfectly, and the ship's brand-new Marconi room buzzed with confident chatter. After trials, Titanic returned to Belfast for any final adjustments, shimming propeller shafts, greasing turbines, and inspecting every watertight door. Shipwrights signaled completion by removing scaffolding and clearing decks of tools. By April 5th, she lay ready, her polished decks gleaming in the early spring sun. When Molly stepped aboard in Cherbourg, she found lifeboats numbered, provisions loaded, and passenger lists complete. Engineers sealed compartments and final wiring tests confirmed that Titanic's electric lights, heating, and Marconi equipment were all go. The living ship had been tested to her limits and passed with room to spare. Edward J. Smith, Titanic's 62-year-old captain, was known as the Millionaire's Captain. He had helmed White Star's largest ships, earning a reputation for steady seamanship and calm judgment. On board, his uniform was spotless, brass buttons gleaming against navy cloth, cap pulled down low. His senior officers, William Murdoch and Charles Lightoller, stood on the bridge reviewing charts. Murdoch, at 32, had survived the sinking of SS Republic in 1909, while Lightoller, 38, was White Star's most senior surviving junior officer from that same wreck. Both carried clipped conversations and precise logbooks. Beneath them, 892 crew members filled every role: stokers in hot boiler rooms, stewards in crisp uniforms serving tea, and wireless operators John Jack Phillips and Harold Bride tapping messages to shore. Phillips, 25, was known for speaking 100 words a minute on the key, an expertise that would later channel Titanic's SOS into history. Molly met several of these men when she visited the wireless room. She noted how Phillips paced amid coils of cable, headset snug over one ear, while Bride stood by, ready to log incoming signals. Their confidence impressed her, brief exchanges that seemed to say, "We understand these machines. We trust them." Later, as passengers gathered on deck, Captain Smith invited selected guests to the bridge for a final look at plotted courses through iceberg fields. Molly, with her keen curiosity, peered over the chart table, marking points off Newfoundland, aware that these charts would soon become legendary maps of a fateful journey. At noon on April 10th, 1912, Molly took her place at the stern as Titanic cast off from Southampton. Families waved from the quayside, bandstands played "Nearer, My God, to Thee," and deckhands guided mooring lines clear. With a gentle judder, the engines reversed, then shifted ahead, sending ripples across the water. On board, first-class passengers waved back, women in elaborate hats and men in morning coats. Molly, standing by a brass stanchion, observed them all with warm amusement. She watched dogs yelp with excitement, children pressed faces to railings, and stewards pass trays of iced lemonade. 20 minutes later, Titanic arrived off Southampton, where two tugboats nudged her bow around. By 1 p.m., she steamed into the Solent, bound for Cherbourg. Along the way, she passed Isle of Wight ferries and coastal liners, their crews tipping caps. In Cherbourg that evening, Titanic took on additional first-class and second-class passengers, some returning from European grand tours, others immigrants clutching dreams of America. Molly attended a formal dinner in the first-class saloon, consommé, roasted duckling, and a final course of peaches in chartreuse jelly. The orchestra played Strauss waltzes, and she noted the elegance of it all with quiet approval. After dinner, Molly retreated to her stateroom to pen a letter home, recounting her impressions of Titanic's speed, luxury, and the efficient coordination of crew and officers. When she signed off, she wrote simply, "The world's greatest ship sails well indeed." On April 11th, Titanic left Cherbourg and crossed the Bay of Biscay under slate-gray skies. Molly rose early to watch the dawn light on rolling waves. She spent the day exploring decks, peering into second-class lounges and visiting steerage to converse with hopeful immigrants. First-class social life was vibrant. Afternoon tea at 4 p.m., bridge games in the smoking room, and lectures in the reading salon. Molly attended a talk on Arctic exploration, her curiosity undimmed by luxury, where she learned of polar ice fields that rivaled what Titanic would face later. On deck, she strolled alongside second-class passengers, listening to accents from Norway, Ireland, and Russia. Children played tag around deck chairs, and stewards distributed lemonade. The horizon remained unbroken, an expanse of sea and sky that seemed to promise nothing but calm. That evening, Molly dined on filet mignon and fine Bordeaux, surrounded by painted screens and ivory-handled china. She complimented the captain on his course, unaware of the precise iceberg warnings delivered to the bridge that same afternoon. Before retiring, she visited the wireless room briefly, where Jack Phillips tapped out messages to Cape Race, Newfoundland, relaying passenger mail. His precision impressed her. Each click a thread, linking Titanic to the wider world, a world that would soon watch and wait for news. On April 14th, 1912, wireless operators intercepted multiple ice warnings. The Mesaba reported large icebergs and field ice ahead. The Californian radioed it was wrapped in ice and unable to assist. Captain Smith reviewed charts in his quarters. Officers Murdoch and Lightoller studied the plotted positions of bergs floating in the Labrador Current. Titanic's scheduled speed, around 21 knots, was a compromise between rapid delivery and caution. Molly, having heard no announcement, spent the afternoon polishing her brass binoculars in the deck locker, an odd detail, yet typical of her keen interest in every facet of life on board. She would later recall waiting for sunset to test them against the rim of the world. As night fell, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee climbed into their crow's nest, exchanging casual remarks about the calm sea. Below them, the hum of engines and the glow of deck lights conveyed normalcy. Passengers danced, dined, and prepared for bed, unaware that at 11:40 p.m., a distant thud would mark the moment Titanic met destiny. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, 1912, Frederick Fleet's cry rang out, "Iceberg right ahead!" On the bridge, Murdoch ordered hard starboard, wheels turned, and steam reversed. Below decks, stokers felt the engines shudder as rivets popped loose. The iceberg scraped along the starboard hull, gouging plates over a length of nearly 300 feet. Molly, awoken by a peculiar tremor, stepped into her corridor, noting the subtle lean of the ship, just enough to whisper that something was amiss. Officers inspected bulkheads. Dr. Dickey and Dr. Simpson toured lower decks, finding some water ingress. Yet with 5 of 16 watertight compartments sealed, many aboard still believed Titanic could endure. Molly, listening at her door, heard muffled orders about closing portholes and reinforcing bulkheads. In the first-class lounge, stewards prepared extra blankets, more from protocol than panic. Captain Smith convened a council. Lifeboats were to be readied, but normal service continued. Molly, ever observant, noted how efficiently crew members moved, ropes coiled, davits inspected, and women and children being informed of lifeboat stations. No frantic cries, just purposeful action. And through it all, the orchestra, perhaps unaware of danger, tuned their instruments for the morrow's plans. By 12:45 a.m., Lifeboat Number 6 was swung out on davits under Second Officer Lightoler's supervision. Titanic carried 20 boats, enough for just over half her passengers. Strict adherence to "women and children first" governed boarding. Molly stepped forward when her turn came, her confidence steady, her voice firm yet kind. She encouraged reluctant women aboard and helped older men find space on nearby boats. Fellow first-class passengers later recalled her calm assurance as inspiring, a steady flame in the night's uncertainty. On the side of the ship, a dozen sailors secured lifeboat number 6 while Carpathia acknowledged Titanic's faint distress signal. Molly climbed down the side ladder, pausing to offer her hand to a frightened mother clutching 2 children. Her presence, tall, composed, and resolute, set the tone for every subsequent rescue effort in that boat. After lowering lifeboat number 6 at 12:45 a.m., Margaret Brown found herself among approximately 20 survivors clustered in wooden benches. Second Officer Lightoler had directed Quartermaster Robert Hitchens to command the boat, but once away from Titanic's side, Hitchens refused to return for swimmers in the water. Molly rose to the challenge. She urged Hitchens to row back, imploring him to gather those still alive. Though no more survivors were ultimately found, her insistence kept spirits from sinking into despair. She organized the women and children, distributed biscuits and water, and buoyed weary souls with stories of her life in Denver's mining camps. The North Atlantic night was mercifully calm. No wind, a still sea. Yet the blackness was complete. Only the stars above and the distant lights of Titanic, now listing and lit in ghostly patterns. Survivors huddled together, wrapped in coats and blankets passed down by crew, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Molly paced the bottom of the boat, checking each passenger's condition. She spoke gently to the frightened, reassured the cold, and kept everyone talking to stave off shock. Her leadership transformed a small, overcrowded boat into a community united by hope and by gratitude for a second chance. Hours passed in measured row strokes and whispered conversations. Around 4 a.m., a faint glow appeared on the horizon, the RMS Carpathia racing through ice fields at 17 knots, summoned by Titanic's distress calls. As the rescue ship drew near, Molly stood at the bow of Lifeboat 6, her silhouette tall and unwavering against the dawn light. At 4 a.m. on April 15th, the Carpathia arrived at the scene, her searchlights cutting through pre-dawn gloom. Under Captain Arthur Rostrand's command, crew members lowered ladders and threw lines, bringing survivors aboard one lifeboat at a time. Molly guided her boat alongside the floodlit deck. She helped each passenger up the slippery ladder, offering a firm hand and an encouraging word. A steward wrapped them in blankets. A doctor checked their condition. When her turn came, Molly stepped onto Carpathia's deck, pausing to look back at lifeboat number 6. Empty now, but for memories of solidarity and courage. Below deck, Carpathia's infirmary staff worked tirelessly, hot tea, brandy, and dry clothing for each survivor. Molly, refusing immediate rest, organized relief efforts. She collected lists of survivors, ensured families were reunited, and even raised funds from fellow first-class passengers to purchase extra blankets and medical supplies for those in steerage. News of Carpathia's rescue spread rapidly. Journalists aboard Carpathia filed the first eyewitness accounts. Molly granted interviews, her composed demeanor and detailed recollections making headlines worldwide. By the time Carpathia docked in New York on April 18th, Molly had been lauded as the unsinkable Mrs. Brown, a heroine who refused to yield in the face of disaster. As newspapers published Molly's accounts, Public shock flowed into outrage and grief. Headlines focused on the loss of more than 1,500 lives, including Captain Smith and many crew. Americans mourned not only a maritime tragedy, but a symbol of fleeting technological hubris. In New York, survivors swarmed immigration halls, some 705 in all, while families lined the docks in anxious clusters. Molly used her newfound fame to advocate for better care. She helped establish a survivors committee on April 18th, raising nearly $10,000 by the time Carpathia sailed again. Reports highlighted social class disparities. First-class survival hovered near 62%, second-class around 41%, and third-class just 25%. These statistics fueled debates in newspapers and salons alike, as Molly spoke passionately about equitable lifeboat procedures and the moral duty to protect every soul aboard. In May 1912, the U.S. Senate and British Board of Trade launched inquiries into Titanic's sinking. Margaret Brown testified before Congress, pressing for stringent lifeboat capacity rules and continuous wireless watches. Her testimony underscored three failures: insufficient lifeboats, misunderstood distress signals, and delays in lowering boats to capacity. She recounted her lifeboat's launch, the refusal to return for survivors, and Carpathia's 3.5-hour dash through ice-laden waters. Her vivid narrative helped shape subsequent maritime law. The hearings concluded with sweeping reforms: new lifeboat standards, mandatory iceberg patrols, and around-the-clock radio operations. In 1914, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, codified these changes, the first treaty of its kind, carrying Titanic's lessons into global policy. After Titanic, Molly Brown returned to Denver and channeled her energy into philanthropy and women's suffrage. She championed orphanages, women's rights, and education, efforts that earned her the French Legion of Honor in 1931 and the nickname the Unsinkable Molly Brown. She published her memoir, The Unconquered, 1922, blending Titanic anecdotes with accounts of mining front wilderness. Although she never used Molly during her life, the moniker stuck in popular culture, later immortalized in Broadway's The Unsinkable Molly Brown, 1960. Even in later years, she lectured with passion, recounting her leadership in Lifeboat No. 6, advocating for maritime reforms, and insisting that compassion must guide progress. When she died on October 26, 1932, newspapers worldwide memorialized her as a beacon of courage and charity, and as someone whose spirit truly could not be sunk. Titanic's loss catalyzed global safety changes. Within months, ships increased lifeboat capacity to cover every soul aboard. Ice patrols were established along North Atlantic shipping lanes, deploying ships to track and report iceberg movements daily. Wireless telegraph requirements became universal. Ships now needed 24-hour radio watch with backup operators on board. The 1914 SOLAS Treaty formalized these standards. Lifeboat drills became mandatory, radio installations standardized, and passenger ship designs limited bulkhead flooding to no more than 2 compartments. Shipbuilders and maritime agencies worldwide integrated these lessons, ensuring Titanic's tragedy would save countless lives henceforth. Molly Brown's advocacy featured prominently in archival records. Her congressional testimony is still cited in maritime law courses, exemplifying how first-hand experience can drive systemic change. Over the decades, Titanic became a cultural touchstone. Books, films, and exhibitions explored her story. In 1964, Molly Brown's Denver home opened as a museum dedicated to her life, celebrating her resilience and civic work. The Unsinkable nickname anchored exhibits about Titanic and about her broader legacy of social justice. Artifacts recovered from the wreck site, china, personal effects, and even a deck chair, lie preserved in museums across the U.S. and Europe. Visitors stand in hushed galleries, reading Molly's letters and viewing her passenger list entry, feeling the human dimension behind steel and tragedy. Titanic's wreck, discovered in 1985, now rests in two main sections 12,500 feet below the surface, her bow encrusted with rusticles. Submersible expeditions document the decay, reminding us that history endures both above and below the waves. Titanic's story resonates today in themes of class, technology, and human hubris. The film, Titanic, 1997, renewed global interest, but its survivors' real voices, like Molly Brown's, that give the tale its enduring power. Maritime experts still debate decisions made that night: speed in ice fields, crew training, and passenger communication. Molly's testimony remains a primary source, cited in academic papers on crisis leadership and gender dynamics during disasters. Annual memorials on April 15th honor victims and survivors alike. In Belfast, Harland and Wolff hosts Titanic-themed tours. In New York, museums display tickets and telegrams. Molly's name often headlines these events, a testament to how one person's courage can ripple through time. Margaret Brown's conduct in Lifeboat Number 6 exemplifies crisis leadership under extreme pressure. She challenged authority when necessary, comforted the vulnerable, and coordinated aid without formal rank, all qualities now taught in leadership courses worldwide. Modern maritime drills echo her emphasis on clear roles and inclusive decision-making. Today's ship captains train for diverse scenarios: communication breakdowns, equipment failure, and passenger welfare. Just as Molly insisted on both protocol and compassion. Her story reminds us that disasters often reveal human strength. In the darkest hours, individuals like Molly Brown show that empathy and determination can illuminate even the coldest night. As we conclude our journey with Margaret Brown, from her first step aboard in Cherbourg to her final days as a champion of justice, consider the arc of history she witnessed and helped shape. Titanic's steel and steam have long since dissolved, yet Molly's legacy endures in laws, museums, and in the very word, unsinkable. Remember her as more than a survivor, an immigrant's daughter who rose to prominence, a philanthropist who never forgot the powerless, and a leader who turned tragedy into reform. Her life invites us to ask, in our own moments of crisis, how will we respond? Thank you for joining the Rain Room, True Tales. May Margaret Brown's story inspire your dreams and remind you that courage, like kindness, transcends the deepest oceans.